We are here to do a video interview about the history of the North Shore. When I say North Shore, I mean Lake north of New Orleans and Lake Pontchartrain, which today composes of St. Tammany Parish, Tangipahoa, and Washington Parish. Now is the time for me to do an interview on what has been found on the North Shore that affects not only the history of Louisiana North Shore, but the United States and also the world. About 60 years ago, in the early 1960s, my father retired from the railroad, and like a lot of people, they get out the old Bible and start looking at the family Bible and stuff. Well, we had a Sharp Bible that was started in 1850 by Marshall Sharp over in Mandeville. And I was teaching in California and coming because it changed the way we travel on water and land, and also how we prepare our food. And I want to tell you how after, right now, I put some items on the table there. I brought over a few books. We're at my daughter's house, Amy, near Rummel High School, and we're doing this interview. But I brought a few things over. James Rumsey is going to be one of the main topics we're going to talk about. Is the last 12 years of his life, which was done by Ella Mae Turner in 1930, about the history of James Rumsey. Those are most important. The third one, I've been working just recently on the history of British West Florida, and because a lot of information has been uncovered in the last few years, last few months really. So anyway, I put together a guide with pictures and maps and everything, and showing it to Ron. It's going to be part of the talk. And but anyway, in the 1960s, I came home during the summer, and my dad showed me this Bible, Sharp's Bible, and these were people from Mandeville on the North Shore. And he kept on saying, who's these people's names in here, this and that, and so forth. I said, well, they just completed a causeway across the lake. And I said, okay, I'll drive across there and see what I could find. I crossed the causeway. It was one span at the time. And I entered, which was the North Shore, by Mandeville. That was the old Sharp's place. On the maps, the Tobin map, it was Zachariah Faircloth's property. He got that way back in when West Florida became part of the United States. But anyway, as soon as I got across, and you get off the bridge, you get on gravel roads, and it was a little country. And I said to myself, wow, there's no history here. You know, I said, how could, but was I wrong as I got into it? That's how it all started. So I started to research the Bible, the names, who were the first people that settled there, and how the land was first settled by the Europeans, the French. It was part of the Lemoyne brothers, Iberville and Bienville, back in 1699. So what we're talking about is over 300 and something years history. But anyway, as I got into it and I did the family names that were on the pedigree chart, I came up with French names, different names of early people there. And then one day in about early 1980, by the way, I was so interested in that, I started to visit people across the North Shore there, and Dr. Calvin on the lakefront, and we decided to have a historical society, Mandeville or St. Tammany Historical Society. So we went along with that. We had meetings and speakers and so forth, and I was collecting names. In the 1980s, I got a book, and the first book is called The Travels of William Bartram. And I started reading about it, but he was a botanist. His father was a botanist, John Bartram. And what he was involved in and what his father, he was friends with Benjamin Franklin. And in 1743, they started a society called the American Philosophical Society. There was no other scientific societies in North America, but the people who were involved, the astronomers and Benjamin Franklin and so forth, got together and formed a society. It turned out later to be very important in what I'm going to tell you, the history of hidden history that has surfaced. A lot of the articles I've read, books I've read, they didn't give much credit to the North Shore about American history or even American Revolution, which, to my surprise, turned out to be not true. And I wondered why did historians miss a lot of that. Well, it goes back to because the North Shore and most of Louisiana and everything, the Gulf Coast, was under 4 different countries in about 60 years. And each country had their own way of keeping their history. With France, I found out later, one of the merchants went down to New Orleans to buy a piece of land on the North Shore, and the notary said, "Oh, every 2 years we send the records back to France." So if you wanted to find something about who got a grant or who did this or that or so forth, who was the governor, you'd have to go to Paris and do the research. Right in the North Shore, it became Spanish territory. So if you wanted to do the history from 1783 on to 1810, you have to go either to Seville or Madrid or even Cuba, Havana, Cuba. The records are there. On the North Shore, it became British property after the 7 Years' War or the War of French and Indian War. And for 20 years, they had records, and they kept very accurate records, but it all wound up back in London in their archives in a place called Kew Gardens, which in 1979 I took a vacation there, and I went and did research for 2 weeks in Kew Garden. It was the same. We had the Americans, of course, took over in 1810. So you actually had 4 countries. You had France, Spain, Britain, and the United States. And the records could be any one of 4 or 5 different places. So here comes a person doing research on certain topics or people, and they get to New Orleans and they say, "Oh, the records are in France." "Oh, or the records across the North Shore in Covington," or this and that. Some of them would go, and most of them would say, "Gee, it takes time and money and I don't have it." So what do? They'd use their own imagination and fill in the blank. A lot of times it was not what really actually happened. And this is what the topic of our interview is about. The different topics, sections that are divided this interview in. Number 1 is the history of Bayou Lacombe. Number 2, the French land grant of Pierre Regard Vaudreuil. He was the governor of Louisiana from 1743 to 1753. By the way, the French were the administrators or the government of Louisiana for the first 63 years. And the important people of different places and offices were French Canadians, like the governor of Vaudreuil, the Lemoyne brothers, Joseph Troite Desrousseau, who started Pearl Island. And then there's another hidden history that comes up that is very important, and that's going to be a man by the name Jacques Hertel Rouville that had a plantation he got from the governor, and his wife was related, and that's going to be the main story. So anyway, quickly going, and then we go to the Potomac River in George Washington, James Rumsey in England. After James Rumsey left Louisiana, number 7, what became of his wife and family? We have a book on that. He separated from them. He went to the East Coast. They stayed down here, and they wound up in the Natchez Territory in Mississippi. And I have the records for that. The steamboat in New Orleans, when we get near the end, number 8 is very interesting. How does New Orleans figure into this interview? It had a great impact on the interview of what Rumsey started just 25 miles north of New Orleans across the lake. So these are the things that I'm going to discuss with you in this interview. Getting back to the 1980s, and I was doing the research, I picked up a book called The Travels of William Bartram. Near the end of the book there, it says that he got sick, and he was trying to get from Mobile to the Mississippi River, and that his guide Simon Farr was taking him from Mobile over to the West Florida, the western part of it, but he got sick. He couldn't see. He went blind. He was laying in the bottom of the boat. Simon Farr, who had a plantation on the Pearl River, was very concerned. He thought something was going to happen badly if he didn't do something. So after he got to his place on the Pearl River, which is about 7 miles up the Pearl River, he told William Bartram from Philadelphia and a botanist, "I can't help you, but there's a man living on Pearl Island that has his family there and everything. He's an Englishman, and he may have some medicines that can help you. Can I take you there?" Bartram said, "Yes, take me there." So when they get there, the man's name was William Rumsey, James Rumsey. And I said to myself, after all this research and French people and so forth, settling on the North Shore, I said to myself, what was a man doing in such an isolated place with his family? How could he earn a living? So this got my curiosity. The red flag went up. And I said, there's something about this. So this started me on the researching of James Rumsey and the story of how the steamboat, he started with the experimental steamboat. A teacher over on the Potomac in West Virginia, her name was Ella Mae Turner, was interested too. And she did a book on James Rumsey. She started researching in the 20s. 1930, she had the book printed. Now, she's sitting there. There was a James Rumsey in Illinois as a merchant, and she thought they were both the same, but she couldn't prove it. So she says that in the book. And not only her, but a lot of from at that time Rumsey worked and developed a successful boat on the Potomac, a lot of people did research on him. But because, like I told you, about the 4 different countries and everything, it was difficult research. But there was more to it than that. Rumsey himself caused part of it, and his family caused another part of it. Why? No one knew the early life of James Rumsey. All they knew was the last 12 years of how he had a successful thing was secrecy. There were no patent laws in the colony after the American Revolution. Only England had patent laws because of James Watt and his perfecting the steam engine to lift water out of mines, which started the Industrial Revolution. Was the Governor Vaudreuil from Canada. Vaudreuil came down. He was the son of the Governor of Canada, who was the governor for 40 years, and he was sent over with a battalion of troops to save the colony. The Iroquois were attacking the colonists in Canada so effectively, a lot of them were getting ready to leave and go back. And the king said, told the Baron Vaudreuil, the father of Pierre Rigaud, to raise a battalion and go over there and fight the Iroquois. And he came over in 1685. But getting back to that, his son came down as the governor. And I looked at the Tobin map. I'll tell you about why it's called the Tobin map. But here's a picture of the Tobin map. And as soon as the governor got down here, he relieved Bienville in 1742. Then Bienville was recalled back to France. And he arrived over here in 1743. The first thing he did was he granted himself a large plantation. First, he bought one plantation, what is near Audubon Park now, from the chief of the warehouse, take caretakers of the warehouse for the company. He bought his plantation. Anyway, as soon as he got here, the economy was in bad shape. He wanted to do something to stimulate the economy. So he says, in the book they said he purchased a plantation. But that is not correct, because no one was across the lake but a few people had a tar factory. It was completely isolated. The government owned that land, and Vaudreuil was the government. So he issued a land grant to himself, 4,800 acres. And he started an indigo plant factory. Indigo was a dye that was very desirable at that time. And he started that to stimulate, to jumpstart the economy. But I got to thinking, 4,800 acres? You don't need 4,800 acres for an indigo factory, maybe 100. But when you get to look at the Vaudreuil people, and you look up at his father in Canada, they were land grabbers. They got their land. This is a picture of the Vaudreuil, by the way, and I'm going to show you his plantation and how it fits in with Rumsey and its hidden history. But his father, look at the land that his father had. All this land up there around Montreal was Vaudreuil's. So when he came down, that land was the source not only of wealth, but as a source of how people supported themselves by growing crops and everything else. But anyway, I said to myself, why would he need 4,800 acres? He didn't. But this is the story that's going to be important in Warren Rumsey. Look, this is the 48. This piece from here to here says Francois Cousin, which was right in 1813, Francois was trying to finesse this property, the old Vaudreuil place. But 4,800 acres is almost 8 of these squares. That's a square mile. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is 4,800 acres. It's much bigger than this piece here. And if you look, the grant that he got went all the way to Bayou Lacombe, where the red arrow is, and it went down there. So it was a huge piece of land that he grabbed for himself. And he started indigo plantation. This grant, the land across the lake on Bayou Lacombe, is going to be very important for 2 stories that I'm going to tell you now. Okay, let's see. We continue. Like I said, this is Vaudreuil. Vaudreuil, when he came down here, he was here for 10 years. He started the indigo plantation. He was well liked by the people. His wife was 15 years older than him. He married in France, and he brought her over. She had a granddaughter called Marie Joseph Samanad, and she was still back in Montreal. But she met a man named Jacques Hertel Rouville. Rouvilles were a very, very important family in Canada. His father, they became minor nobles, and how they got this promotion and being a noble is that they fought the Iroquois. They were the ones that kept the French from being run out by the Indians. Not only was his father, Jacques' father, military man and fighting, but his grandfather too. And they are important in history, even the United States. They had a Queen Anne's War in 1701, and his father, Rouville, went down and attacked, which is called Massachusetts, Deerfield, on the western side. He captured the whole town and brought them back in the middle of the winter back to Canada. That's an interesting story. But anyway, Jacques Hertel Rouville joins the military. He marries Marie Joseph Samanad, and he comes over. He's to Louisiana, the French colony, and he's under his wife's grandfather, the governor. But anyway, what starts happening now is it heats up between England and France, and it was beginning the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War. And Jacques Hertel goes up there, he fights, and he comes back. But England won. We know that England won. They defeated France, and for the victory, they took Canada. And in 1761, they issued a proclamation. And the proclamation was very offensive to the French in Canada, living there, of the 85,000 people. The British only had 3,000 soldiers to occupy the country. They were spread out all over the world. But anyway, to pay for the troops to remain there and fighting all over, they started to raise taxes, which the colonists didn't like. They had the tea tax, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Act, and then they had the proclamation that came out, and to assimilate the Canadians into the British Empire, they made a list of things that would happen to Canada. First of all, they abolished the Catholic religion. What? These people were staunch religious people, Catholic, and they abolished our religion. They abolished the civil rights of the people over there. They have said that they couldn't be nobles anymore. They abolished the nobility. They did all these things, and it really upset the Canadians, even though they lost. The leaders of the British colony in Canada wrote back to England and said, look, you got these people, we only have 3,000 British troops and there's 85,000 people over here. You better think about reversing your decisions. And they decided they would reverse decisions. The English, in their proclamation, did all these things that upset the French colonists. Now, the colonial 13 colonies were all for that because they were over there. Their religion was the British Protestant Methodist religion, and they didn't. They came over to the New World for religious freedom and also for land. But anyway, the leaders realized that they would have a revolt on their hands if they didn't do something. So they passed the Quebec Act. I'm getting to Jacques Hotel Rouville. But anyway, this was a straw that broke the 13 colonies back, and they started hostilities. The Quebec Act was 1774, the same year that Rumsey left Illinois and he got down to the North Shore, to New Orleans, and he was advised, if he wanted secrecy, to go across into the North Shore. The plantation Chaminade Hotel Rouville was on the Bayou Lacombe, this big 5,000 acre plantation. But anyway, 1774, West Florida was started, and we had the British on the North Shore. But anyway, this really teed off the colonists, and the leaders said so, and it started the war. Down in Louisiana, North Shore, on Bayou Lacombe, was a plantation, the ex-plantation of Governor Vaudreuil. He was recalled in 1753. He stayed around for a year or two to introduce the new governors and everything. But he left and he went back to Paris. His wife died soon after she got back. They got back to Paris. But what did he do with this 5,000 acres down there? He left it to his wife's granddaughter, Marie Joseph Chaminade, and her husband, Jacques Hotel Rouville. Jacques Routel had all his family and all his friends around Montreal. They had about 150 minor noble families. He was so upset with this proclamation of 1760, he left his wife and the Bayou Rouville, the plantation, and he went north to Canada. Even the Canadians didn't know this, but when I was working with my friend Anita Campo, and I explained this to her, I started going into the Canadian history books. The history book, I forgot the name of the author, the History of Montreal, though, in one of the important books, had several pages, a paragraph, and it mentioned Jacques Hotel Rouville, who was the owner of this plantation on Bayou Lacombe. And it said that even without permission of the British, he started to organize the nobles. He meetings, which was not approved the thing, but slowly he got organized and everything, and he opposed what the British were doing. The British, seeing what was happening, completely did a 180 degree reverse and did the Quebec Act. But while appeasing the Canadians, they infuriated the colonials. So this is why Canada, by the way, did not come in as a colony to fight the British. They were now firmly encamped in a British camp. And that they still today, of course, part of the British Empire. But this Jacques Hertel, this is one of the hidden histories, that he had the plantation on Bayou Lacombe. Now his wife, he came after it was all, right after they did the Quebec Act, he came back down and he died in New Orleans in 1774, early. Before that, James Rumsey he liked the place so well in 1776 that it was working out so well that he bought the plantation of Rouville on February the 6th. And he started his experiments. He was there a year and a half when a man named Francois Cousin, who had a place on Bayou Bonfoucault in his house, he gets a grant right north of Hertel's plantation and where Rumsey was doing his experiments. It shows clearly on the map on a branch of Bayou Lacombe called Bayou Rouville, and you can see where the little bayou goes up. Here is Cousin that just got a new grant from the British because he brought his slaves over and he had a brick factory. He had 6 boats, and as these boats would come back and forth across, they were passing right where Rumsey was doing his experiment. The secrecy was blown. So Rumsey decided to move, even though he owned this huge plantation. And with his contact through his father-in-law, who was the right-hand man of Oliver Pollock, whose friend was Dr. Joseph Salon, whose wife was Elizabeth Jesruso, that owned Pearl Island. Rumsey got permission to move to Pearl Island. And that's how Rumsey got to Pearl Island, of Jacques Michael de Rouville. He died in 1774. His wife, now she moves to New Orleans with their daughter, and a year later she sells the plantation to James Rumsey. James Rumsey was there doing experiments with a giant kettle, a large iron kettle that held 500 gallons of water. This became a problem later on. It not only because of the war started, which it was 13 years after Rumsey started his experiments that he delivered the first successful steamboat, December the 3rd, 1787, on the Potomac River, right after working for George Washington, trying to get a passageway around the Shenandoah Falls. But anyway, so Jacques Hertel Rouville is not known in history as one who helped bring on the Quebec Act, which is one of the 5 acts, intolerable acts of American history. But this is unknown, and it should be brought to the point that he was very instrumental in developing the Quebec Act. Now, getting to James Rumsey. James Rumsey, this is James Rumsey's early life, the big one. He was born in Bristol, England. How do I know James Rumsey was born in Bristol, England? You said you drop a sentence there, one of the most important, hidden history. It's not in the history books. They have a big error saying that he was born in Maryland. Why do you say that? Well, for several reasons. Doing the research over a 20-year period, with the help of a computer and email, I found a lot of information and even contacted people in Bristol, England, who were in history societies. They didn't know. They knew that James Rumsey went to the United States, but they didn't know that he was the one with the steamboat. But anyway, there was a man called H. St. John Rumsey. He was a speech therapist. And it's an interesting story. I'm not getting off out of line, but this is his pedigree chart, the speech therapist. He started doing research. He was a therapist at the King's College in London. King's College was started in 1440 by King Edward VI, and they have these beautiful old buildings and everything. But anyway, H. St. John Rumsey wanted to do the survey of his Rumsey family. He spent over 40 years during the summer when school was out. He would go to Wales, Bristol, and he started this pedigree chart. And if you look at the pedigree chart right away, it tells you the names of Rumsey's mother was Anna Marie. His grandfather and great-grandfather was called Lacy. They were important in the church. They were the bell ringers. Their names on the bell. They were in a little town called Cricklewell, which is about 40 miles, 50 miles southeast of Bristol. And on and on and on. I checked Maryland. They were, even though their records went back to the 17th, there was nothing on it, James Rumsey. I checked the Library of Congress, where they said that Rumsey was the son of an Edward Rumsey and grandson of Charles Rumsey, which was not true. But anyway, a friend of mine told me about Jane Rumsey living in Illinois, and her and her father in the 1880s started their research on Rumsey. She did research on Rumsey's all her life. So I contacted her, wrote letters, and they're in my collection at Southeastern. And she said, I've traced every Rumsey name that I could find. There was only one James Rumsey that was up in New York. They had a little business. But this James Rumsey, you said, could not have been born in Maryland. And the final straw was James Rumsey himself says that I was born in England. I'm a native, and it's in L.M.A. Turner's Rumsey book. When he's writing a letter back to his brother-in-law, Charles Morrow, and he says that he was with the problems he was having with his new boat over there, the Columbian Maid, and that he found London a lot different than he thought it was. There's a lot of money here and so forth for the boats, but there's also a lot of problems. But anyway, he says, I'm American now, and my family. Rumsey was married twice. It's one of the reasons. What happened was, well, we didn't get to Pearl Island yet. But anyway, Rumsey was doing his research on Bayou Lacombe, a small bayou called Bayou Rouville. It's on the map. It's on the Tobin map. Rouville Estates, Rouville Heights, roads called Rouville. And next year there's going to be a problem. There's a trace, 40-mile bicycle trace that passes right by where Rumsey was doing his experiment. And they got the planning department for St. Tammany is doing, they bought they created a park, a 25-acre park, which is right across where Rumsey was. The waters that wash on Rumsey's side where he was doing research are the waters that are hitting on this new park. So next year, when this comes out, about these two hidden histories of James Rumsey, and he's 37 years in the United States before he went to the Potomac and developed this Simo. They're going to open this park. The trace about it is very important. Are they going to do anything about Rumsey, the important missing hidden history that he did? He started his experiments on Bayou Lacombe. We will find out next year. But anyway, Rumsey, because of secret, and he was extremely secret. He wouldn't even tell his own friends and everything, and they didn't know about it. Moves to Pearl Island. The Pearl Island was started by Joseph, a friend of Governor Vaudreuil's back in Canada. But anyway, after he bought the land from the Indians and developed Pearl Island, Rumsey got permission to use that to move away from Bayou Lacombe. And this is where William Bertram got sick in 1777, July and August, and he spent a month at Rumsey's place getting well, but he couldn't find out what Rumsey was doing there, how he was living. That was a big secret. So, but anyway, the war, tension was building up on the colonies. They were starting hostilities back on the East Coast. A lot of them were trying to get away, and they came down to British West Florida to settle. But Rumsey kept contact with his father-in-law, who was William Murray. William Murray and Rumsey were both getting back to Rumsey's early life. Rumsey father was James Rumsey Sr., his mother was Anna Marie Williams. He was born in 1743, and then after he was a little boy, the next one, she had a miscarriage. The next three children would either born dead or died in infancy. She was died in 1749, and Rumsey lived to be, of course, adulthood, but his father married again. He had a shop. He was a sugar broker, very prosperous. He moved to Bristol before Rumsey was born. He invested in ships. He had over 22 ships in a 10-year period. Some of the ships he owned, others he invested, giving up the portion of up to 500 pounds to have a part of it. But the war of the 7-Year War started between British, France, and Spain, and the ships that he invested in, some of them were privateers. He lost 5 ships in a period of 2 years. He went broke. Rumsey, because his father got married again and had 9 children, and this is where the history of Rumsey comes in. And 4 of the children were later brought to the United States. But Rumsey, because of the war getting started, and the Spanish found out a month or 2 earlier that they were going to attack Britain. Baton Rouge, Governor Galvez was going to march on Baton Rouge. But Rumsey found out through his father-in-law and Oliver Pollock. And he said, that's the end of my experiment. Oliver Pollock was very interested in Rumsey as long as with other people because he was a merchant and he owned ships. And the idea of moving a ship by the power of steam was really way out. A lot of people thought he was crazy. They called him the fireman. But anyway, Oliver Pollock and his father and everything decided that's the end of your experiment. That'll be the end of the steamboat. We got to get you out of here before this war starts. So he had him write a letter to Galvez saying that Oliver Pollock commissioned as a captain of engineers in the colonial army. He was the agent for the colonials. And he appointed Rumsey as a captain. He wrote to Governor Galvez and said, I want to go fight with the Americans on the East Coast. That was just a ploy. They wanted to get him out of Louisiana because Galvez was enlisting every available man to fight the British in Baton Rouge and so forth. But he allowed Rumsey to leave. Rumsey got out on one of Oliver Pollock's boats that was in the harbor at the time. And for 6 months, he probably went to Cuba, but he pops up 6 months later in Baltimore. And he continues his experiments in Baltimore on the Potomac River, which was successful finally in 1787. But anyway, Rumsey left. When he left, he took one of his daughters with him, Susanna. He was married to Jane McIntyre. Going back a little bit, William Murray and when his mother died and his father got remarried again, they started to have children. They had 9 children. Rumsey left and went to Barbados where his father had a sugar plantation. He was a sugar broker. The war broke out and Rumsey raised a platoon of men and went into the British Army. After the fighting on some of the islands down there, they won. They captured Cuba and so forth. There were a lot, and the 42nd Regiment was one of the regiments that would fight. It was called the Black Watch. They had a lot of casualties. Rumsey got into the Black Watch, even though he was from Wales. The Black Watch was composed mainly of Scottish men. And in this Black Watch was William Murray, who was a captain. And after the war, they was stationed in Long Island. The Indians were uprising in Pennsylvania, the Conestoga wagon thing. And they were transferred, their regiment, 42nd, was transferred to Carlisle. While they're in Carlisle, William Murray married a widow called Martha McIntyre. She had 2 children, James and Jane. Captain Murray got into resigned from the commission too, and he became a merchant in Illinois. And when they were in Illinois, he heard about some laws in England that would allow him to buy Indian land and sell. So we have in Rumsey's story here, the early part, they started a company called the Illinois Wabash Land Company. And they went to the Indians while they were merchants in Illinois and bought land, huge tracts of land. One of them is now Chicago, where Chicago stays, and another one on the river, Vincennes. And they were going to they bought the land from the Indians, but England rejected it because they wanted to pacify the Indians and they didn't want people buying Indian land and taking the Indians. They didn't want any hostilities with it. England was trying to prevent the colonists from going across the mountains. So they created the Quebec Act. And the Quebec Act changed the boundaries. One of their rules of the Quebec Act that you couldn't buy Indian land. So Rumsey and his father-in-law, who were married to the McIntyres, Martha McIntyre with William Murray, and Jane McIntyre, they were both merchants there. They were part of this Illinois Wabash Land Company. And they bought and that's a very interesting story there. But anyway, England rejected it. Murray went down to and became a partner with Oliver Pollock, who was the merchant down in New Orleans and also interested in the land. But anyway, so Rumsey gets out of Louisiana and he gets to the Potomac River. Rumsey becomes associated with George Washington. And if you go to the National Geographic magazine of 1985, there's a story, a large story in there about George Washington, his obsession to get around the Shenandoah Falls. There's George. And so Rumsey takes the job with after meeting George Washington, being the director of this project, the Potomac Company. We want to talk about Rumsey and the time he spent in the Louisiana Territory. A total of 14 years. 9 of the years was up in Illinois country. And that was called the French territory. He was a merchant there. After that, he was told by the merchants of Philadelphia, the Byington, Bayonton, Wharton, and Morgan Company, that he could make a lot of money by becoming a merchant. They couldn't, the British, who won the war and won the territory, couldn't get up the troops up the river from New Orleans with Major Farmer. The Indians north of Baton Rouge stopped them a couple of times. So General Gates said he's going to send the troops down the Ohio River. The 42nd was stationed in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and they picked a captain and 100 men. Rumsey was picked because he could speak French. And he was one of the officers with the commissary. He went with him. So in 1765, he goes down the Ohio River to take over Fort Chartres for the British. Rumsey was sent ahead when he got lost in the woods and everything. But anyway, they take over the Fort Chartres and they go back to Pennsylvania. The merchants wanted to get into that territory to sell the supplies to the British Army and also to buy, deal with the Indians with furs. A man named George Morgan was a partner of this Philadelphia firm. Mm-hmm. He sweet-talked Rumsey into saying you can make a lot of money if you become our agent, and we want to set up some stores in Illinois country. They did set up 4 stores. Rumsey was desperate. He was getting letters from his father, who went broke. Mm. He had to give up his store in Bristol and everything. He had 9 kids, and he was desperate. He was writing letters. So Rumsey, this was on his mind, resigned his commission. He sold his commission and became an agent for this Philadelphia company. He spent 9 years in there. He almost got killed many times. They had 4 stores. One at the Fort Kaskaskia, Fort Charters, Kaskaskia, Vincennes. They had 4 forts up there, and Rumsey would move around to different stores. One store he was in one time, outside the store, Pontiac, who was the chief of these Indians who started the Pontiac Rebellion, was killed by another Indian, a Delaware chief, knifed him to death. But anyway, Rumsey risked his life many times traveling from one store to another and keeping things going for this company in Pennsylvania. He never did make money. So after 9 years, and after the Wabash, Illinois Wabash Land Company failed, Rumsey was mad. The company he was working for wanted to liquidate because the fur trade was going down and so forth, and they were not making money. Rumsey never made money. And he was mad because for 9 years, they told him he was going to make a lot of money and help his father. So he was liquidating their company, and he acquired a lot of money holding it. He took the money in early 1774 and left. You call it absconding, but anyway, he left because he said they owed him the money. He went down to New Orleans where his father-in-law was working with Oliver Pollock, and he said he wanted to, while they were in Pennsylvania, a man by the name of Henry was working with steam. He developed the Henry rifle, but he tried to work with steam to move a boat. So Rumsey was well familiar with steam and shipping through his father, in Bristol. So when he gets down there, he wants to get a secret place to start his experiment. And they suggested that he go across the lake to Bayou Lacombe to this plantation that Marie Joseph Salmonade owned and do the experiments there. But anyway, he spent 5 years down in New Orleans. A year and a half, 2 years, he was on Bayou Lacombe. 3 years he was at Pearl Island. The war was breaking out, and Oliver Pollock helped him to get out. This is hidden history. They don't know about it. It's not in the books, but it's in my volume 22A. He goes to Baltimore. He didn't plan to come back. They must have had trouble with his marriage, because he took his younger daughter, Susanna, with him, and he left his other 2 kids, Lacey and Anna Marie, with the mother. Jane lives with the mother. They move up to Natchez later. After Rumsey died and everything, you can find out what happened to Rumsey's first family by reading the Natchez court records by May Wilson McBee. It's all in there. His father-in-law dies there, father-in-law was very important, William Murray. He started that land company, which failed. But anyway, after Rumsey left, his last 12 years of his life it's all in the history books. He met the most important people, not only on the East Coast, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin with American Philosophical Society, even started a Rumseyan Society for it. And over in Europe, when he went to Europe in 1788 and to 92 when he died, he met Thomas Jefferson when he went to France. They were so close that Thomas Jefferson allowed him his carriage in England while he was in France. Rumsey went over to France and stayed with Jefferson. So Rumsey was a person that they respected and were very interested in what he was doing with the steamboat. And he met the most important people in these different places at the time. The book, the history tells you that he was, well, when he first got over there, he went to visit his father. He mentions in there. His father was working on a grist mill. Rumsey, by the way, is not only famous for his experiments in a steamboat, but he had over 20 inventions of improving the grist mill and the water wheel. Thomas Jefferson said he was the most famous genius, the most that he ever met. And Washington was impressed with him. Benjamin Franklin even formed a society with. So he must have had something that was very important. And here was a